Ferguson, Dean of the Estopanol College of Architecture and Planning at Ball State University, and I want to welcome you to today's lecture by Autumn Visconti. Her expertise is timely, as so much of the world's attention is focused on issues of climate change, biodiversity, equity, and resiliency. I'm very much looking forward to hearing her talk. We have both AIA and LACES credits available for faculty and friends who are watching. Email caplectures@bsu.edu for information. At the end of the presentation, we'll have time for questions. Please type them in the chat and I will summarize them. I also want to let you know that our final lecture of this calendar year will be Architecture Professor Emeritus Tony Costello, who will be speaking on November 15th about his 2 decades of experience working in Haiti. Now I'm pleased to turn it over to Malcolm Cairns, Professor of Landscape Architecture, who will introduce today's speaker.
It's a pleasure for me to introduce Autumn Visconti today. Autumn's guest lecture credentials were recommended to us by Gina Ford, a previous CAP speaker, and our original invitation to speak was accepted, I think, in the fall of 2019 for a spring of 2020 visit and lecture. But we all know what happened to our lecture series that pandemic spring. So I'm so glad we are now catching up and that we at least have both a Zoom audience and a live audience in AB 100 for this lecture. Autumn Visconti is a senior associate at Local Office Landscape and Urban Design. Since joining Lola, her approach has been devoted to public realm projects in better preparing cities and communities for climate adaptation and promoting social justice through environmental equity. Most recently, Autumn led the design and implementation of the East Side Coastal Resiliency and the Brooklyn Queens Park projects with Bjarke Ingels Group, BIG, 2 of BIG's largest infrastructure and planning efforts in New York City. Before joining BIG, Autumn was project manager for James Corner Field Operations, having built projects that range in scale and region from Miami to Chicago and throughout New York City. Autumn has been an Urban Design Forum Forefront Fellow since 2019, focusing on economic, equitable, and environmental adaptation strategies for the city of New York. She is the recipient of the 2018-19 Outstanding Recent Alumna from the College of Architecture and Urban Studies at Virginia Tech. She's also the 2011 recipient of the National ASLA Student Honor Award and the 2010 Virginia ASLA Certificate of Honor. Please welcome Autumn to our fall lecture series.
Thank you, Malcolm. Hi, everyone. Glad to meet you all virtually, and hopefully in the future I can meet you all in person. I'm going to share my screen now, so bear with me for just a second. You guys could see my screen. The little nod will help. Okay, great. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ball State, for having me today for a very exciting lecture. I think the overall topic and theme of the lecture is landscapes at large and urban planning and infrastructural systems coming together to create this idea of transformative landscapes and rethinking urban design through social infrastructure. I think going forward, we really want to question what is transformative and what is landscape architecture. I think primarily transformative to me is the idea of how landscapes can evolve naturally through public processes, through environmental considerations, how the world is slowly evolving in response to climate changes and growing population densities across the world. But also we have to think about what is the definition of transformative, and it's causing or able to cause an important and lasting change in someone or something. I think of this as causing change in our urban environments and our communities and really leaving people with this idea of a transformative experience. To me, I really think of the idea of using landscape combined with infrastructural systems as a way to not only provide new lines or new systems of flood protection or new lines of infrastructure, but ideally thinking of how these systems can provide amenities for communities and neighborhoods to enjoy. Today, I'm going to share with you a large range of projects. This includes a 66-acre park that doubles as flood protection, to as large as a 17-mile highway that also doubles as a linear park. I'm also going to share with you a new kind of design that we developed over the last year or so, definitely during the pandemic, of how large-scale land reclamation can double as restorative habitat landscapes in the middle of the Malacca Strait. And then also back home here, how a post-industrial Pierscape can double as a beacon of public open space on the Williamsburg waterfront. Bringing to you a couple of learning objectives. This aligns a little bit more to the educational component of the lecture. I think it's really important to learn how resiliency projects can be more than infrastructural solutions by creating multifunctional and dynamic urban spaces. I also really want to help, explain and really show how the combination of technical solutions with urban planning generates new forms of public open space, and not really or necessarily doing everything by the book. It is important to push the boundaries and really think about new forms of public open space. The idea of exploring how design can help lead the conversation in city planning. This is really important in a lot of bureaucratic processes in a lot of city agencies, why it matters and how it contributes to the profession. Gaining insight on how public processes, this is community engagement, and the importance of really working with a lot of community stakeholders and leading to innovation and design solutions that can solve complex urban problems. Key takeaway from that: multifunctional, new forms of building, city planning, and public process. This all relates to the profession of landscape architecture. And I was lucky enough to kind of stumble into landscape architecture when I was an undergrad, and I originally joined university to follow the pursuit of civil engineering. Then I was interested in architecture and urban planning, and landscape architecture was kind of drawn to me in the sense that you can create all these and combine all these systems into one cohesive design solution that includes city building, public infrastructure, ecological systems, architecture into one design profession, and that is landscape architecture. And to me, it's not just designing small gardens or terraces for the wealthy, but it's also really thinking about how we can influence our cities and our campuses across the nation, across the globe, and really providing a better community and neighborhood amenity for everyone to enjoy. So here I really wanted to show how landscape architecture can be a little bit more of a transformative urban public project, and how it can really help transform a lot of our own backyards and our own cities. So thank you to Malcolm for the introduction. I did lead one of the BIGU's first projects called the ESCR, which is the East Side Coastal Resiliency Project. It was born from the concept of the BIGU, which was a winning design competition by Bjarke Ingels Group, or BIG, out of Denmark and New York City here. And the first phase of that project is a little bit more, it is developed in the sense that we just broke ground this past fall, and I'm pretty excited and proud of this project. So I'm really excited to share with you guys the whole process of how we got there. For those who are not familiar with the BIGU, it was a project, or it was essentially a competition that stemmed from the Rebuild by Design competition, which was an effort by HUD Secretary Sean Donovan back in the Obama days. That was the result from the Hurricane Sandy catastrophe that hit in October 2012. So it's been about 9 years since Sandy hit the Northeast region of the US, causing massive blackouts across Manhattan and large scale flooding and inundation for communities throughout the Northeast. So you can see here is an aerial photograph by helicopter showing all lower Manhattan essentially experiencing a blackout during the evening of Hurricane Sandy. And the BIGU was conceived as an idea of really, instead of protecting the shoreline with just a single line of flood protection infrastructure or resiliency infrastructure, we wanted to really combine it with this idea of public programming and really introduce the human element in this one infrastructural move. And we really wanted to diversify the amounts of program that occurs along this linear stretch of coastline along the lower Manhattan tip. And we also like the idea of the High Line, where you combine public open space and amenities with really practical infrastructural solutions, such as a raised elevated railway. We also wanted to take the the Jane Jacobs meets Robert Moses approach and really think big about the ideas of how we can transform our own cities and really have a very human approach, a human scaled approach in terms of creating smaller scale, diverse opportunities across this one line or this one move along our coastline. So this diagram really kind of highlights the entirety of the Big U, where it is 10 miles of coastline that runs along the lower Manhattan border. Here it highlights the extents in the flooding of Hurricane Sandy of the different neighborhoods and blocks that occur inland along Manhattan. And it also highlights the different neighborhoods, and this is really important, and especially in a diverse city such as Manhattan, understanding the unique identity of each neighborhood as it runs along the Big U, and really thinking about the idea of the U transforming and becoming customized to each neighborhood as it runs along the coastline. What's also important to understand, topographically speaking, and in terms of creating a system that is fail-safe, is thinking about the Big U as a hull of a ship or series of hulls to a ship, where each kind of compartment acts as its own line of flood protection. So here you can see different kind of points of high ground that the Big U would tap into at moments of topographically high intersections along the coastline. Part of the Big U really engaged with hundreds of stakeholders, both public and private stakeholders. And an example of some of these public stakeholders include city, federal, and state agencies such as FEMA or the governor's office, or New York City's mayor's office and departments of Parks and Rec, to local and privately owned businesses, and really understanding and rolling your sleeves up and getting on the ground and talking to each and every human being that was impacted by Hurricane Sandy within the kind of regional footprint that we were looking in. So beyond the Big U was the first phase of, which is identified as the East Side Coastal Resiliency Project, or ESCR, as we're going to say in short, since it's a little bit shorter to say. But here you can see the footprint of East Side Coastal Resiliency Project, stretching from East 23rd Street all the way down to Montgomery Street along the East River of Manhattan. And this is about 2.5 miles of coastline that was identified as the first phase of this project because of the amount of impact that Hurricane Sandy had. You could see here in the shaded area in gray, the amount of flooded city blocks that occurred just from Hurricane Sandy. It's also one of the most vulnerable neighborhoods, Lower East Side of Manhattan, where a lot of low-income, vulnerable populations, senior citizens live in this area. So it's a really high concentration of people that really inhabit the floodplain. And this project was deemed one of the most important phases to build first and foremost before realizing the rest of the Big U as you move along the kind of coastline up the Hudson River on the other side of Manhattan. So the important elements of ESCR includes meeting a lot of HUD requirements, which in turn follows a lot of the FEMA requirements for flood protection. This is more of a federal level understanding of really kind of building capacity to withstand certain flood events. We also wanted to communicate that this project responds to the urgent need of flood protection. And these photos are just from Hurricane Sandy, but we do experience today, even in Hurricane Ida, a lot of what you see in the lower left image here, a lot of overtopping from the river onto the bulkhead here. And that's just during high tide increased or advanced rain events. Our highways are also flooding at a pretty regular rate in terms of just normal rain events that happen during the summer months. And I think what's most important aspect of this project is the generation of the plan and the ideas of the different kind of layouts for the plan that was built with the community members and the stakeholders over the course of 2 to 3 years. We led up to 500 community meetings, and that was working with different NYCHA campuses, or the New York Housing Authority, which is the low-income or subsidized housing equivalent to New York State, working with a number of co-ops along the East River and a lot of small business owners and all the different community boards that we had to gain approvals from in order to move the project through the city planning approval process through the mayor's office. So again, really thinking about and utilizing the design and evolution of the plan of the park as a way to communicate the need for flood protection to local residents, getting their involvement in the project and really building or generating the sense of ownership for individuals to feel like they own a portion of the park that their future depends on. So a couple of existing photographs of East River Park today, and this happens in cities across the world where a lot of our waterfront connectivity is divided by 4 to 6 plus lanes of highway where it's impossible to reach our own waterfront. And this occurs in our own city of New York, where we have the FDR highway bisecting a thriving, bustling city urban fabric density to the waterfront of the East River. And it's only connected by a series of pedestrian bridges that are inaccessible and incredibly steep and eroding today. We also have a lot of flooding that occurs on site in East River Park during light rain events. And then from larger rain events and storm events, a lot of the vegetation that was planted during the Robert Moses era of planning is starting to dissipate today. So here, conceptually speaking, in this axon, you can see the extents of Hurricane Sandy as it flooded the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And you can see that a lot of these building complexes are within the floodplain. Our proposal is effectively raising the edge of East River Park along the East River here and using the landscape as a form of flood protection. This is in addition to a series of flood walls and floodgates that connect along a lot of the urban pinch points, and they effectively tie into high ground at these high points back into those ends of the hull of the ship. And then reconfiguring the programming of the park that exists today and making it more efficient in terms of layout, providing more amenities and amenity spaces for people of all ages and backgrounds to use, and also providing a very important park element that's kind of gaining popularity today, which includes a more lawn space and passive open space for people to kind of enjoy and sit in the grass and really kind of just bask in nature. Because for a lot of people, this park in its relation to a lot of the lower income socioeconomic populations on the backside of the park, this is their vacation. A lot of people can't afford to go on vacation to the Caribbeans or go out of state for a vacation because of their lower income condition. So the park effectively is a way for people to seek urban respite. So it's something we want to really provide diverse program amenities for everyone to enjoy. So kind of flying through a quick aerial overview here, you can see a lot of the sports fields kind of wrapped around by native plantings and passive open space, but also really kind of reconfiguring the geometry of the existing East River Park, which was a very orthogonal layout. Again, this is an existing park today that's called, that was designed by Robert Moses, and it has this very geometric layout that responds only to the city grid. But here we wanted to create something that was a little bit more human scale, and soft for people to kind of move through the different program areas across the park. Here you can see one of our, we call these different geometries, islands of program or archipelago, aka a parkapelago of program. And here you can see this kind of raised edge condition along the bulkhead, effectively raised about 8 feet to keep it out of the floodplain on a dry day. And then during a rain event or a severe storm such as Hurricane Sandy, really providing flood protection to the city behind the park. This is an existing aerial of East River Park, again, kind of showing this more orthogonal layout of the Robert Moses era park. And, you know, thinking about a new future of the park with this kind of generous landscape approach that really creates this inviting sequence and really, you know, upgrading some of the pedestrian bridges that cross over FDR. Some of the pedestrian bridges that we showed in the past are that exist today are too steep, inaccessible for those in wheelchairs, and they are kind of falling apart. So a lot of the new bridges that we designed are wider, more generous, on one level, so there's no switchbacks. This explains the shift in the bridge as it crosses the highway, really thinking about that length of bridge trajectory in order to provide a simple slope for people to move over. And thinking about softer geometries in terms of infrastructural solutions, so a simple ribbon or tied arch really kind of creates this gateway as you enter the park. And then you're greeted with a kind of a great lawn as you approach the waterfront. And then again, thinking about how this park is raised and provides flood protection for many residents on the backside of the park. Okay. So I'm going to keep flipping through here. We have a lot of program space, including diversity and for all users, such as an amphitheater space, passive and active recreation, areas for performances, as well as areas for picnicking and hanging out. Part of the community engagement process was a large 60-foot model. It was a 1 to 500 scale model that, you know, a lot of people use renderings and diagrams to explain the design process. But I think the most effective means of communicating a lot of our designs is the use of physical models. And we would roll this out onto display at key events and really gain or foster this sense of ownership for the park as people began to interact and learn from the design just by visiting the model. We also did a number of animations or fly-throughs that show the scale of the park. This was also a way to help, you know, customize a lot of the design solutions and really think about the input we were gaining from the public and really tailor some of the program opportunities to meet a lot of the stakeholders' needs. We also had to go through a very extensive community board approval process. So we did meet with multiple community boards because of the sheer scale of the project. We had to go through a number of jurisdictions in order to meet the mayor's office approval process and city council approval process. So on the other side of the East River, in our own home of Brooklyn, we were invited to effectively do a napkin sketch of a design proposal to address a highway condition that occurs along the Brooklyn Heights neighborhood here in Brooklyn. And it is effectively looking at the triple cantilever highway, which was another Robert Moses era design solution for really bringing highways to the water's edge. But in this condition, it was a triple cantilevered structure, which has been used and it is pretty successful in terms of an automotive standpoint. But it is in severe decline and beginning to decay and or degrade, and really think about the future of this infrastructural system that becomes a little bit more responsive to our needs for more landscape and more connections down to the waterfront. So today, a lot of the cantilevered edges are beginning to corrode, and they're starting to take off the amount of cars and trucks off of the structure. And I think they're reducing the number of lanes on this piece of elevated highway. As part of our quick sketch proposal, we looked back into the history of this embankment along the Brooklyn waterfront, and it is a pretty steep edge that was also greeted by forested hills and this kind of terrace waterfront condition. So we really wanted to see how the original urban relationship was with the waterfront back in the 1800s of the working waterfront of the Brooklyn Heights neighborhood. So doing quick diagrammatic sections, which often really help in explaining a lot of our most complex urban issues. The original BQE structure, that's the name of the highway, is the BQE, kind of runs within a DOT right away, which is the Department of Transportation. And that is our existing conditions of this highway now. This structure is within the footprint of the DOT owned land. On the other side is Brooklyn Bridge Park, which is a successful waterfront park that was just built by Michael Van Valkenburg in 2010, and is still being built on new phases onto different parts of the park, further north and further south. I think a lot of you that are familiar with the park notes this large iconic berm that runs through a large portion of the park, and the construction of that berm was built for people on the park side to use, or it was built to mitigate noises for park users to enjoy a little bit more of a bucolic waterfront relationship with the park, instead of hearing this loud highway adjacent to the plot. The Department of Transportation had this approach of reconstructing a new elevated highway above the triple cantilevered highway. And while they were building this temporary structure, they were going to repair this triple cantilever structure and bring cars back onto that structure. We effectively saw it as a design challenge to think about the footprint of DOT versus parkland. And what if we shared those two plots of land and provide a new form of highway, which is not so new, it's been done before, but you would build a 6-lane highway at grade, and you would effectively cap it with a park on top. And then you would repurpose the triple cantilevered structure to create this idea of a triple highline feature that really adaptively reuses the infrastructural system that's in place today as a new form of parkland, and really increase the amount of park land over the 6-lane highway and growing Brooklyn Bridge Park up the cantilevered structure into the adjacent neighborhood. So we coined the term of the BQP. So it's taking the idea of the BQE and turning it into the BQPark, and really thinking about a menu of ideas that can respond to different conditions of the neighborhoods, as well as different conditions of the structural system, and really thinking about how we can offer diversity in the design solution, such as an elevated park that can be a triple cantilevered highline, a more natural embankment, or something that's a little bit more designed and terraced to create this idea of a continuous park all the way down to the waterfront. So this is the structure today. You can see this triple cantilevered structure, a small neighborhood through street, which is not utilized, a parking lot that runs adjacent to the Brooklyn Bridge Park, and then the berm that kind of divides highway from park. And kind of cutting into that berm, taking the landscape and stretching it over the highway, Again, the highway is at grade, so you're not really tunneling a lot of the highway because there are a number of infrastructural systems such as the subway or other utility lines that run below grade, especially along the waterfront. So we wanted to avoid really excavating in this kind of portion of the Brooklyn waterfront. And then thinking about new forms of park use that can occur on top of this triple cantilevered structure for different amenities. And if the cantilevered structure was not structurally feasible, we could tear it down and really give back to the landscape and thinking about creating the historic rocky cliffside that used to be prevalent back in the 1800s. So here we began to think about the overall footprint of the BQP. And here you can see the neighborhood of Brooklyn Heights, Brooklyn Bridge Park, and then the idea of the park of the BQP running along the coastline, connecting on top of the highway and really stretching it beyond the original footprint we envisioned. There was a lot of inquiry about the footprint of the park and whether or not it would impact the existing Brooklyn Bridge Park. So we wanted to highlight that it's not necessarily impacting much of Brooklyn Bridge Park. You can see here in the lighter green is the Brooklyn Bridge Park, and then the darker green would be the BQP. So again, running it along the backside of the park and really connecting the upland neighborhoods down to the waterfront. We worked with the landscape architect of Brooklyn Bridge Park, and we collaborated on a number of illustratives here. This is showing the kind of vantage point of standing up on one of the top tiers of the structure, looking down to the waterfront of Pier 6, I believe, and really, seeing the highway as you are standing above it, and then envisioning the future of a connected, continuous green landscape that kind of acts as a ribbon connecting down to the waterfront. If you were standing on the waterfront today, you would look back at the Brooklyn neighborhoods and see this triple line of highway and trucks kind of running by on the BQE, and then really thinking about what would be the vision of the Brooklyn waterfront if it was just a park that would connect all the way up to the hillside. And then in key moments, a lot of the highway bridge over some existing historic streets. And a lot of people use these streets coming from the subway to connect to their waterfront. So a lot of people were concerned about, the structure as people are walking under them and whether or not it's safe as they're about to enter the park. And one of the key features is really opening up this view and taking the park and really kind of putting this landscape connective tissue over it, so people are greeted with a park when they arrive to the waterfront instead of a rusty highway. Similar to the ESTR project, we went through a pretty extensive rollout of the design concept. Again, this was all a kind of back of envelope design sketch with a number of illustratives and diagrams to explain our concept, but it was pretty well received by our community here in Brooklyn Heights and a number of other communities adjacent to this neighborhood, where we presented it at a town hall. This was pre-COVID. This was about 2,000 people kind of, looking at the design and rollout of the park and really accepting it and being pretty actively vocal and positive about the design idea, because it wasn't taking a highway and replacing it with another highway. It was taking a highway and really rethinking its purpose, rethinking more advanced and efficient solutions of realigning it along the waterfront, and then really thinking about continuing a park and public open space on top of that. So we went through a pretty extensive review with DOT, the Brooklyn City Council, as well as community engagement and touring with a lot of people to really gain a better understanding of all the constraints that we had to work with. We began to take a step back and think about, like the BIGU, what was the idea of taking that similar approach of rethinking the entire highway as it runs through all the different neighborhoods from Brooklyn up to Queens to the Bronx, even out to Staten Island, and really think about our infrastructure as a way to adaptively reuse it over time and have an approach for it to become an extension of parkland that really unites the historic waterfront of these neighborhoods back to the communities upland. Okay, on the other side of the planet, I want to introduce you all to Penang. This is a competition entry called BioDiversity. It was a land reclamation project that we were invited to envision a new approach for designing islands on the south shore of Penang, which is an island in the middle of the Malacca Strait. The Malacca Strait is a cultural melting pot for the entire world. It is a kind of harbor for a lot of our shipping routes. So people from all different backgrounds around the world live in Malaysia. It's a very diverse region of the world in terms of the human population, but in terms of biological diversity, it is one of the most thriving biologically diverse hotspots in the world as well. So this is something we want to combine the forces of human diversity with biological diversity and rethink a new way of urban and city planning that's informed more by the landscape and the cultural richness of this place. So zooming in here, this is an island on the western shore of Malaysia. And the idea was to develop 3 new islands within the footprints south of Penang. This is an island off the coast of mainland Malaysia. And it's pretty dense urban center on the kind of eastern coastline of Penang. It is a new kind of tech industry and a hub for the region. So it is a future Silicon Valley for Southeast Asia. And they want to expand their infrastructural systems into the southern shore and create 3 new islands for people to kind of move to and inhabit over time. And here we wanted to take a step back and really think about the communities of Penang. It's a very diverse island with people from all different religions and backgrounds. And different kind of economic sectors. And we really wanted to understand what makes this island thrive. We looked at different ways to create this sense of identity, really become a steward for the environment and really preserve heritage for the island by working with a couple of the key community stakeholders and community groups and a lot of the local industries around the coastline, and really think about how this transformation will impact people that already live on the island and what are the future generations of Penangites over time, and really thinking about their children and creating this new, I guess, new city for Penang. And in Southeast Asia in general, we really wanted to look at the dense urban character of the neighborhoods, specifically in Penang. Here you have this really unique, dense urban network that's very organic in response to the natural conditions of the island, and really thinking about this cultural melting pot as a source of inspiration to create this new urban identity that's not so generic, really being kind of sensitive to the idea of diversity and really thinking about how we can create a really spectacular space that will evolve over time, depending on the use or the cultural identity of that city. As a landscape architect, I was obviously very focused on the environmental and ecological conditions of land reclamation. What does that mean for our future if we're depositing and creating new islands in the ocean? But what if we kind of flipped the idea of large-scale land degradation into large-scale habitat restoration and really providing new beacons for ecological footprints in kind of these really sensitive areas? And we began to think about the shoreline and creating new homes for habitat, and really working with local scientists and ecologists to understand habitat cycles and what different species needed in order to thrive, to establish and thrive in key areas the site. Some of those species include the olive ridley sea turtle, which is a beautiful species, but we really got into the weeds of understanding their habitat needs and their locations and working with local universities on identifying and building future habitats for these aquatic animals. We also thought about using land reclamation as a way to create offshore reef restoration and really think about creating offshore habitats and providing storm surge protection for the new islands and along the South Shore of Penang. So thinking about this combination of both offshore and onshore systems in place in terms of landscape and connecting all these different habitats onto one transect that would occur across the entire footprint of all of the islands. So each island has its own identity, where the one on the far right is more urban. And then as you begin to move west, it becomes a little bit more porous and aquatic, and becomes an archipelago of islands that connect to the mainland. We first established these 12 principles. These relate more to the metrics of how new land and new urban development can be calculated over time, and how we use the metrics of calculating carbon footprints, calculating land value and habitat creation, and really using these as a way to guide key moments in the master plan over time. This includes buildings that were responsive to the climate and landscape, icons that were creating a new sense of identity for new populations, the idea of porosity and really receiving water in this really humid climate, understanding new forms of mobility, and really thinking about the idea of how we can stack mobility in key moments to create a more efficient system. We wanted to reduce the amount of fill for land reclamation, so we invented this idea of the land frame and really thinking about the perimeter of the island as the structural footprint, and then really using the pockets in between as moments for infrastructure. And then we really dove into the biological diversity of the site and thought about these diverse edges along the waterfront, habitat corridors that connect over waterfront edges and streams and creeks, and really connecting or creating this continuous line of habitat bridges that tie back into the mainland. The idea of performative landscapes that respond to rain events, the idea of creating an infrastructural cloud that's within a small footprint and self-sufficient within each neighborhood, the idea of responsive streets that really are tailored for human and pedestrian activity to really improve walkability of neighborhoods, between neighborhoods across all three islands. And then thinking about the diversity, not just of building types, but of buildings themselves, and really understanding that the success of urban planning comes from the diverse nature of our own urban footprints. So from a landscape approach, we looked at our different edges for the island, creating these soft tissue-like edges that really draw the landscape and draw our marine ecology into the center of the islands. Again, having this gradient of hard to soft as you move from right to left here on the screen, and really thinking about drawing the landscape deeper and deeper into the islands. And then introducing the idea of land bridges from mainland or main island Penang down to these smaller islands, and really introducing rainforest habitat activities into these new islands across and from the mainland. And then really thinking about the different scales of habitat that would occur within and around the island footprints, but also informing a lot of the urban networks within each community. Taking a step back from the landscape perspective, we looked at climate as a way to really influence the overall layout approach of the city, and really harnessing the predominant winds. Penang is a very humid place, and a lot of people don't necessarily like to be outside, especially if it's hot. So we wanted to orient all of our streets towards the wind, so we can create these larger wind tunnels that would act like a natural air conditioner for the outdoors. We also wanted to provide shade. So a lot of the building heights would respond on the northern end and provide shade on the southern end of all of our streets. We wanted to create this idea of a walkable neighborhood that's also unified by these different icons that would occur at each district or each neighborhood. And thinking about the density and diversity of each of these neighborhoods and really blending a lot of the land uses and land use typologies together. I think one of the key things we should all think about in a lot of our infrastructural projects around the planet is the importance of creating and maintaining habitat corridors. A lot of our infrastructural systems today really act as a divider between these habitats, and this leads to larger scale degradation in fauna, but also in the flora, and in turn really degrade our landscapes across the planet. So we need to think about how these systems can be tied together above or below existing infrastructural systems. So the idea of land bridges is something we really want to continue to push for no matter what the project is. And the idea of how landscape can help integrate street design as well as performative landscapes in between buildings, and the idea of creating this fluid and walkable neighborhood between the different city blocks. I'm going to flip through these to be mindful of time. So this is an important cross section because we took a lot of the land that would be used for infill on land reclamation projects and reverse it and use that kind of capacity to help build infrastructure. Very similar to what New York City does, is having a lot of these heavy infrastructural systems below our buildings and below our sidewalks, and really using that location to help create more efficient systems that in turn feed into the nearby buildings or nearby landscapes and city centers, and creating a more human scaled approach for connectivity in between our buildings and landscapes at grade. Throughout the islands, we had these different neighborhoods that were tailored to sports or makers or wellness, and really creating this identity that responds to different economies, really supporting the fisherman economy along the South Shore of Penang. Also thinking about the cultural identity of a lot of the gallery owners, and really thinking about a localized arts district. These were all kind of brought together at a heart in the center of the island. We call it the water square, or it was the blue heart. So really thinking about this new relationship to water and using it as a form of public open space. And then in the next islands over, the increasing the amount of water into that urban heart is kind of apparent here, where we begin to create wider waterways for people to travel, and really think about these waterways as a way that can perform and really be the kind of lifelines of these islands. And further east, or I'm sorry, further west is the more kind of porous island, which was a collection of neighborhoods that were centered around this floating marina, and really having a truly aquatic neighborhood that people could respond to and live a water-based recreational lifestyle. Just checking on time. I'm going to flip through these rather quickly. This is back home in New York City. This is the Pierscape Park, which is Domino Sugar Waterfront. It is a 5-acre park, which is along 4 blocks of the Williamsburg waterfront here in Brooklyn. It is a park that is effectively on a pier structure that was reclaimed from it in its industrial past. It acts on a gradient of active programming to passive. And I think what's important to me here to share with you in this very limited time frame is my love for landscape architecture and the profession really stemmed from a lot of how we treat landscape after or really thinking about the post-industrial age of landscape and how landscape takes over a lot of these large-scale industrial relics. And one of those projects that really inspired me as a student in college was Duisburg Nord by Peter Latz, partners in Duisburg, Germany. And it was an interesting kind of moment in my life to really see how landscape can be more than just a park. It can be a way of transforming industries over time to become more accessible and really giving back to the earth what the industry would kind of take away from the earth, and really thinking about the idea of nature kind of taking over, and really thinking about landscape as more than a means of just a designed kind of park-like experience, but also just as a force that can't really be reckoned with. And it's something that we should respect over time. So this was kind of combining those past passions with future ambitions of creating a park that really used industrial relics from an old sugar processing plant on the Williamsburg waterfront. So we wanted to provide diverse program amenities for a lot of people from all different backgrounds to really enjoy their new waterfront. Because a lot of the waterfronts, especially here in New York City, have been industrialized. And we're starting to reclaim that land and really think about public open space and how do we pay a tribute to these industrial relics that once used to be our economic lifelines for the city, and really kind of give back to the communities and creating new forms of public open space that blend resiliency aspects, native planting, passive and active recreational programming amenities, and economic opportunities into one footprint, something I think that we should all strive to do, no matter where the project is located. So again, I think if anyone's ever in New York City, this project opened shortly before COVID, and it is one of the most populated places along the Williamsburg waterfront with millions of viewers a year, or visitors a year. And it is a very popular place, and something I'm pretty proud of. And this was during my time at field operations. We used a lot of the industrial relics as amenities for the park, as well as iconic moves such as preserving some of the shipping cranes to really hold up a elevated catwalk that would be a future canopy walk that people can walk through the different kind of canopies of trees, and then reclaiming and reusing all of the wood trusses from the existing warehouse and using the wood from the warehouse to build this custom furniture for the park. So this is on the other side of the East River, where East River Park is right here, and this is on the Williamsburg, Brooklyn side of the East River. So it's kind of bookend approach to East River. So since most of my professional experience has been with Bjarke Ingels Group or at BIG, and I recently left BIG and joined a firm called Local Office. It's here based in Brooklyn, New York. And I'm very proud to join this firm. It's a smaller firm, but it has a large ambition, and really think about what the idea of local is, and really thinking about the indigenous populations that once inhabited a land, and really brings that kind of underlying foundational a way of thinking and influencing our design moves, and combining that with people who live on the land today, and really thinking about the diversity not only of user groups that exist today, but the diversity of different timescales, and combining that with landscape design solutions that are more resilient for our landscapes and for cities in the future. We also take a very integrated systems approach where we really map out a lot of these kind of climate datums, and really think about how everything is in flux, and we really want to synthesize how these design moves are influenced by changing systems in our atmosphere, as well as changing populations on the ground. And here we're returning to our roots of tribal uses in the land, and thinking about how that is the way to be resilient in the future, and really using indigenous form making in order to provide new forms of resiliency for the future. And one of our key projects that we have here is the kind of New York City's first net zero community, which is located in Rockaway Beach. This is a beach located just outside the city of New York. and is a self-sufficient community that relies solely on solar energy and geotechnical solutions combined with a resilient dune park forest along the coastline. So thank you everyone for a large array of projects, both big and small. And I will open up the next couple of minutes or so to questions. But again, thank you everyone at Ball State for having me. And I'm glad to share my experience and really hope I can persuade everyone to join landscape architecture at some moment in their lives, because it really is a way to become a transformative experience in terms of our careers, but also in terms of our own backyards and our own communities.
Thank you, Autumn. If you are online, if you want to enter your questions via chat, I will read them. And Andrea, I think you're in room 100. You might scan the group to see if there are any questions that you could repeat at the computer there.
Got it.
I've got one question. The last project, what was the name of the last project you shared?
It was Avern in Rockaway in Brooklyn, and that's with local office.
Okay. Other questions from the room, Andrea? Anything there?
That was ours.
Oh,
Any other? Here's one.
I wish there was a camera on the auditorium
Right.
so you could see everyone.
yeah.
Just, it's like a desktop, no cameras here. I'm going to verbalize this. Malcolm asked what it was like to work for a big group like BIG.
That's a great question. I actually really enjoyed it. It was it's a large office in New York. There's about 200 people, 250. And I speak a lot to diversity, and maybe it comes from my experience at BIG, because all the diverse disciplines under one roof was something that I really enjoyed working with. So from building design to product design, you would be sitting next to someone who designs, light fixtures, and you would look at them and you would say, hey, what do you think about this furniture or furnishing element for a park? And we would just, have a sketch session right then and there, and really think about the different scales of design. Even at a master planning level, it was quite fascinating to really bring any scale of design conversation or dialogue to any person within the office, because we all came from different backgrounds, but at the end of the day our language of design is similar, and we used to help think outside the box in terms of what is possible for any kind of design solution.
We have one question in the chat. Has BIG implemented any urban furniture along the Brooklyn waterfront? And if so, is it difficult to balance function and resilience in regards to flooding?
Okay, I think those are two questions. A lot of the furnishing elements we initially designed for East River Park. We wanted to create this idea of a bench that would, respond to different communities along the kind of 2.5 mile length of the first park. So having like an iconic bench that responded to different neighborhoods along the waterfront was one idea. I think because of our client, it was a public agency, and a lot of park agencies across the US, often default to their standard bench or furnishing element so they can maintain it over time. I think we began to really push and really think about what would be a new form of standardization in terms of their own products. And we began to visit a lot of their fabricators and really understand the maintenance regime of those elements. So we got a little by way of customizing some of their smaller pieces. In terms of flood protection, we did design a family of furnishings that respond to the smaller footprints that run along the coastline. And by smaller, I mean more constrained areas where the building meets the roadway and then there's water. There's no land for park or anything beyond that. So a lot of the flood protection responses would be deployables or walls that would come up or respond to rising waters. And we wanted to create an element that would double as furnishing or be a fixed element that was more architectural and playful. So really thinking about these elements to be new forms of playgrounds that would double as flood protection and allow for these kind of porous openings that respond to street grids to close during flood events. So again, that relates more to like designing a kind of flood protection system that's embedded within a furnishing element such as a playground or a bench even. So those are ideas that really, like I was saying earlier, the scale of thinking of urban design and infrastructural systems that double as park and flood protection, those scales, can happen at a large city scale, but they can also happen at a smaller human or pedestrian scale that can be as small as a bench and as high as the base flood elevation. It all comes down to the human experience and how people touch and walk along these different elements.
I see nothing else in the chat. Anything from the room, Andrea?
Wait, yes.
What material used to raise
The park with the cool acronym, what was used to raise the ground level of that?
So the average fill depth was about 6 to 8 feet, sometimes 10 feet. And a lot of the fill was going to be reclaimed from dredge material off the Hudson or from nearby New Jersey or Pennsylvania on land kind of fill material that would be cleaned and transported to site by barge. Also within that fill material, you have to think about the flood protection system, and within that fill is a very long and linear sheet pile that would be driven into the ground as the kind of ultimate form of flood protection. It's just buried underground, but everything around it would be increased in elevation to act as what the Dutch use a levee, and levees are very shallow berms of land, usually with a solid core or a clay core that provide that impenetrable below grade medium, because a lot of flood water comes through the water table or the groundwater table. So expanding horizontally and vertically, because of the massive scale of that project, we wanted to create that idea of this like hyper levee, and really thinking about the horizontal versus vertical kind of dimensions of that park.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Anything else from the room?
If anyone has any questions in the future, I think feel free to email me, and please share my contact information. I really do care about educating people about our profession and sharing the knowledge of what's possible for landscape architects in the future. So if anyone has any questions in the future and think about it, please reach out to me. I would be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
If there's nothing else, it doesn't sound like there are more questions. Seeing great lecture. Thank you. So thank you, Autumn. This has been fascinating, wonderful work. We really appreciate you taking the time to visit with us, and wish you well on your career.
Thank you so much. And I look forward to hopefully coming in the future and in person. Be a
We're
little
going to give you a round of applause for real because we're all in the same room. So.
Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate it. I think sharing the knowledge is my favorite thing to do. So please stay in touch.
Very good. We'll hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.